staff the classroom?
Well, I just haven't been able to get this camera to turn on today.
Really?
So I need to know the basic instructions and see if I can find, but we can get started. We have Zoom, the audio's working. We have Zoom set up, the
Okay.
video, I'm using this video for Zoom. So whenever you're ready, but don't feel like we have to start right now.
Well, I'm always ready.
All right. I know it.
Maybe not prepared, but ready. So, I know that we're last week and this week, the genre is wisdom. And there are some books in the Bible that are called the wisdom literature. But what I want to do for a few minutes at the beginning today is talk about wisdom is a thing. It's not just a genre. It's an actual thing. It's a thing in human history. It's a thing in philosophy. It's a thing in the Bible. And I want to talk a little bit about wisdom as a thing. Sorry, I don't have a better word for that. I was thinking coming up here, well, there's a Latin word raise, but that just sounds far too snooty to say it's a raise, R-E-S. But anyway, it's a thing. And one of a lot of people try to define wisdom. One of the best definitions I have seen of biblical, the way the Bible uses the word wisdom, is the following, this little short thing. It says, wisdom is knowing the greatest goal in any situation and the best way to achieve that goal. I like that. There are two parts to wisdom. The first thing that a wise person does is they say, what about this situation really matters after all? What's the greatest goal? What is it that is really worth doing here? And then the second part of it is, what's the best way to achieve that goal? And that's a wonderful way to define what the Bible calls wisdom. It's essentially practical. And that's very, very important. And it does not first come to mind when you think about, because we mix up being wise and being intelligent, or being wise and being well versed, or something like that. And this is not the way the Bible defines wisdom. Wisdom is to be wise is to know the way that works, to take the approach or to something that will work. That's what the wise person does, the practical way. And it is not the same thing as knowledge, having a lot of knowledge. Now, I was thinking about, we can sometimes say, well, to be educated doesn't make you wise, which in one way is true, unless you are educated in being wise. It is possible to learn wisdom. In fact, the wisdom literature in the Old Testament often starts by saying, now listen to my instruction, said to a son or a daughter, listen to my instruction. So education can make you wise if it's education to make you wise. But education just in the sense of accumulating facts or accumulating theories about things or developing strong opinions about things, that doesn't enhance wisdom at all. And I'm talking to a lot of people today who've been in graduate courses, and I expect you've had the experience that I had. I found out that there are people who are the world's authority or among the world's authorities in some academic discipline. And yet, as you get to know them as people, you find out that they are not very wise. And in fact, they sometimes let this slip in class. If they get a little off the topic. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but I've listened to some very erudite lectures in which the lecturer suddenly slipped into saying a bunch of things that were absolute rubbish, as the British say. And one of the things you have to learn as a graduate student is how to distinguish between what this person knows as a scholar of data and who they are as a human being. The two may not match at all. So just to accumulate a lot of facts does not make you a wise person, or to have very strong opinions doesn't make you a wise person either. I've thought about this a good bit in just my own life experience. My brother did his doctorate at an Ivy League institution and speaks several languages. We're on Manhattan. We're in New York one day. We're walking down the street. We're talking. We fall discussing my father, who barely graduated from high school, having to work 2 jobs or something and try to do that too. And my brother said to me, he said, you know, as I look back on it, he said, not only was our father far wiser than the 2 of us put together, but he was also smarter. And I said, you know, that's exactly right. As I look back on it, I realized that. And it was a great kind of lesson that I learned in my family, that a part of my family was extremely well educated, but you didn't put people on the top 10 in wisdom based on how many years of graduate work they had. You just couldn't do that. And I thought about another of my mother's father, or my grandfather. He didn't make it. He barely made it through the 8th grade. And one day I was talking to the president of a very large university, who had grown up with my grandfather in the little town. And he said, you know, we had a baseball team. And he said, your grandfather was on it. And he said, I was on it. He said, there was another guy named who was also the president of a major American university. Kind of an interesting thing for a small town to have these guys on the same baseball team. And he said, there was never any doubt in our mind about who the leader was in that group. And it was your grandfather, who never went to the 9th grade. And I thought that's something for an American educator, president of a big university, to admit, to say, you know. That's just, and that's so biblical. The idea that while you do learn to be wise, it's not the same thing as being intelligent or being well versed or having a lot of information. The other thing about wisdom is, according to the Bible, wisdom is divine. It is part of God. Some people have said there's a Trinity in the Old Testament. There's Father or Creator. There is Spirit, and there is wisdom. There are those 3. You could call them elements of God, if you would like. But those 3 things are divine. They're eternal and they're divine. And we experience God in those 3 ways. We experience him as Father or Creator. We experience him as Spirit, in which he actually is involved in the life of the world. That's why so many times in the Bible it says, and the Spirit of God came upon so-and-so, or the Spirit moved over the waters, or whatever. God acts through his Spirit. And then there's wisdom. And another very interesting thing about, I know the Bible gets a lot of bad press nowadays for being patriarchal, you know, and male dominated and so on. It is true that one of the major figures for God is a father in a patriarchal family situation. It's true, but it's not the only one. And as a matter of fact, wisdom is almost always depicted in the Bible as female. It's Lady Wisdom. There are other female figures, by the way, in the Bible. For God is above gender, okay? But we're human beings and we are not, and so we have to describe God with various figures, some of which are male-oriented and some of which are female-oriented. This one happens to be female-oriented, that wisdom is depicted as feminine, as woman. Read Proverbs 1 and read Proverbs 8, and you'll see that extended picture of wisdom as a woman. Now, another thing about wisdom in the Bible is, well, wisdom even in philosophy, it's just something to think about. Wisdom transcends our world and stands above it. It's a part, in biblical terms, it's a part of God. And people who try to live without wisdom or with the wrong basis for their wisdom, the Bible calls fools. It's not trying to insult. The word fool, not always used to insult somebody. It can be used in a very sympathetic way. And so we have this very famous statement. It's not a book of Proverbs. It's actually in the 14th Psalm. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now, is the psalmist just trying to insult people who are atheists? I don't think so. I think he's simply saying that it is very impractical. It's very impractical to try to build the structure of a civilized world without admitting to some kind of system of behavior of right and wrong that is higher than human opinions and feelings about things. That wisdom is a thing, and human beings who don't understand that there is some standard that rises above their being human are simply left with the idea that you just do what seems like maybe is your opinion of what you ought to do. We've never been able to have a civilized human institution or world or state or family or anything where people think that way. I think the Bible says there was a time when every man did what was right in his own eyes. Now that's foolish, because what results is, well, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, a lot of wrong. It'd be, if we were all angels, then we could just say, let's just all go according to our better instincts and we'll have a wonderful world. We are not angels, folks. Sorry to let you in on that. There's a lot of bad stuff down in there. And if there's not something that makes some judgment on that, C.S. Lewis deals with this in such beautiful ways. One of the reasons he says there's got to be a higher power is because it would just simply be impossible to live otherwise. A few people can deny it and claim they're just getting all of their wisdom from just thinking things through. But the Bible would say, no, wisdom comes from above. It even uses that phrase in one verse in the New Testament, the wisdom that comes from above. So the world, the Bible claims, has a built-in system of wisdom, and we violate it at our peril. And this wisdom adheres to our being human. It's not something we thought up in our society or that changes from one historical context to another. It's part of being human. It's not part of living in the 21st century or the 8th century or the 10th century BC. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with being on this earth as a human being. And that's why you just can't read the book of Proverbs and not think, good grief, these people, this is amazing. Think about how long ago the people who wrote those things lived. I can almost guarantee you they would not know how to use an iPhone. Almost guarantee you, because I hardly can. And yet they have this great, why is that? It's because that interaction between human beings and wisdom doesn't belong to any age, culture, language, technological advance, anything like that. There is a divine wisdom according to the Bible, and when we conform to it, we become wise. And it comes, let me not use religious language. Let's just say let's call it Mother Nature, okay? Mother Nature provides wisdom. And it doesn't come from societal norms. It comes from our nature. I really wonder, by the way, and I don't want to get off into the weeds here, but I wonder how far well, first place, we probably need to spend more time than we do saying, what is really Mother Nature telling us about being human? I mean, what is it that we should all sort of instinct, the dumb beasts around us, they don't have any trouble doing what they are designed to do. We call it instinct. They know when to nest, they know when to lay their eggs, they know when to fly to another country. They know all of these things, and it seems to just be built into them. We, fortunately or unfortunately, don't have a lot of instincts that work that way. Although I think we probably do have a lot of instincts. And I think part of the tragedy sometimes of being human is that we can stifle those instincts and start to act in ways that are not human. They're not what we were intended, just like, some animal or some bird begins to act contrary to what it is. The next thing you know, that species disappears. No species can continue to live that does not live in accordance with its design. So the question is, do human beings have a design, and how far can we go in doing it some other way and survive as a species? Now, I could get into specifics about that, and then we'd have huge controversies. So I don't want to do that right now. We want to all love each other at church. And so, but we would soon get into things that then we would say, well, we're getting political or or whatever, and I don't mean to do that. I just mean to say that we need to get some reflection on how often we can say, I know that it seems to be of our nature or biological nature to do this, but I think we're going to do it this way. Here I am already into the weeds. I realize that almost all of medicine is trying to counteract what Mother Nature wants to do. So I know there are two sides to this issue, but it's just something we need to think about what wisdom is. But I do have two other things I want to very quickly say. I want to talk about something about age and wisdom. Okay, in most cultures, the older somebody is, the more highly respected they are. In the Western world, we're not so much like that, and I think I understand why. It has to do with iPhones. Since we are so driven by constantly changing and advancing technologies, it means that the older you are, the less likely you are to be, up to date on technology. And so it's a kind of a joke in our culture. And those of us on the old side have to just joke about ourselves. We don't know which button to push. Okay. And we laugh about it and we go on. Somewhat more serious is the issue that says that because somebody is not up to date on the technology, that they are somehow not wise, or that the traditional human idea that living longer gives you an opportunity to become wiser no longer is applied. This is very dangerous because it's if you keep sloughing off, if you keep eliminating the people who've had some experience with this situation that you're facing, or this problem that you're facing, this tragedy, if you just keep relegating them to an old folks home and forgetting about them, we're probably one of the few cultures in history that has ever done that. People have generally said, no, you're losing this vast amount of experience and knowledge, because the longer you're a human being, the more you know about being a human being. That's not tied to any technology. It's not tied to any culture or anything like that. Older people have had more experience with the results of conforming or not conforming to certain standards. They know what's going to happen because it either happened to them or it happened to somebody they knew. And so they've had that experience. Now, let me say one other thing about that, however. Being old is not the same thing as being wise. We have all known some old people who were, oh boy. Practically every opinion they have is what? And practically every decision they make is, whoa. So it doesn't come automatically. It's just that there's a chance. There's always a chance that when people have confronted a situation already in their life 4, 5, or 6 times, and you're confronting it for the first time, they might have learned something that would be valuable to you. And that's why I think, and the book of Proverbs often talks about paying attention to people who've had some experience. So you might still be old and foolish, but you might not. And so it's worth thinking about. Now, I'm going to quit in just a minute. There are certain, the last thing I would say about wisdom, it's remarkably simple. It's not complex at all. You'd think, oh, lady wisdom, part of God, divine wisdom, the world, this is going to really be complicated. It's usually not. It's usually extremely simple. I've read through the Proverbs many times. We had our Wednesday night meeting for years, and Helen used to make us fortune cookies, and we'd put a proverb in the fortune cookie. Everybody would draw one and then open it and then talk about the proverb they found inside the fortune cookie. And they're often very similar, and they're just self-evident. And you think, right. And here are just 3 or 4 things briefly that come up over and over and over in ancient wisdom in the Bible and elsewhere. One of them is, it's better to work hard. Better to work hard. I can't tell you how many proverbs talk about the sluggard, or the guy that lies around until noon, That's not just the Protestant work ethic. That's biblical wisdom that says, make something of your life on the earth. Work. The second one is be honest. How many of the Proverbs just say what you mean what you say. Don't act like you're one thing when you're something else. It just over and over and over again, you get this ancient bit of wisdom. And then closely connected with that one, the third one, which I will put in the Wilson translation. I don't know if there's a Hebrew word for this. Watch your mouth. Watch your mouth. I can't tell you how many of the Proverbs, the ancient wisdom, talk about talking. And in the general advice is, it's always better probably not to than to. There's some wonderful, even some of the Proverbs are meant to be sort of jokes. There are these Proverbs that say it's a whole lot better to keep silent and have people think you are a fool than to speak up and have them know you're a fool. So in general, the ancient wise men said we talk too much. That's sort of point number one. And point number two, when we do talk, sometimes it's not helpful. So many of the Proverbs say, when you talk, things need to be sort of better afterward and not worse. And so how many human tragedies started when one person said something and it made it worse, and the other person said something back and that made it even worse, and it goes back and forth until somebody gets hurt. And the ancient wise people said, just cool it. A word fitly spoken is better than a apple of the wood. Saying the right thing, not just gotcha. I hate these political debates. I hate them. They're just entirely connected with gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. And I keep thinking, I'd love for somebody to quote a proverb or two to these people before the next debate. And so says Lady Wisdom, watch your mouth. And then one other thing, and then I'll quit. And this is a lot of proverbs are given for young people who are looking forward to a lot of life ahead of them. How many proverbs say, choose your friends? Choose your friends. And how many kids have had immense struggles in their life because they were not wise when they chose their friend? Or how many adults for that matter? And how many of the proverbs say, even to the king, king, you may have great power, but be sure the people around you are good and are wise. Because if they're not, you're not going to be either. And so choose your friend. Aren't those things simple? And yet there's the ancient wisdom that comes down to us from Father above.
All right, so last week we talked about Proverbs, and as part of that we watched a video. This is just handouts with the text for today, so you're welcome to use your own Bible if you would like. There's not enough for everyone. So we talked about Proverbs, and we watched a video that imagined Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, the three wisdom books, as three people in conversation with each other. So Proverbs was imagined as a woman, a young teacher who is really smart and is full of energy and has lots of smart things to say in response to all different kinds of things happening in life. And Ecclesiastes and Job are imagined as Ecclesiastes, a middle-aged critic going through a midlife crisis of some sort, and Job as an old wizened man who has gone through a lot firsthand, and who I'll pull this closer to me so that they can see me as well. An old wizened man who is engaging with the young whippersnappers. Who are speaking not from experience, but from observation and things like that more so. So those are the three that are in dialogue. We started with Proverbs last week. Steve, I'll take that one because I since that was not being used. So those three are in dialogue with each other. And last week we talked about Proverbs first, because Proverbs kind of sets the stage for Ecclesiastes and Job. Proverbs shows kind of these natural laws, maybe, in terms of what happens, what is fair, how things should work out, and how things often do work out. And then Ecclesiastes and Job bring in the questions of, okay, so what about when they don't work out that way? And in particular, like at the very center of that is like the good getting what they deserve, like the righteous getting good things and evil, the wicked people getting bad things. A lot of it boils down to that particular dichotomy, that there are many others that we could talk about as well. And so Ecclesiastes and Job are kind of wrestling with this premise. So we're going to start with Ecclesiastes, which is on one side of this page. If you're going to just use your Bible, it's Ecclesiastes 3 that we're going to use kind of as our case study for today. But before we turn to that, I want to give you a little bit more context for Ecclesiastes. So anyone know what's the most famous line from Ecclesiastes? Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is, yes, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Unfortunately, meaningless is a really terrible translation for the Hebrew word there, hevel. As you probably know, all translations are interpretations, and meaningless is definitely an interpretation of hevel. So what hevel means in a very literal sense is smoke or vapor, and meaningless is one of the interpretations of that metaphor. But the Hebrew writer of Ecclesiastes chose the word hevel very intentionally because smoke or vapor is a really dynamic metaphor. And meaningless is maybe a tiny, tiny part of that metaphor, but it is not the complete metaphor. So hevel, hevel, everything is hevel, hevel, smoke, smoke, everything is smoke. So that is one of the things, whenever you read Ecclesiastes, whenever you see the word meaningless, replace it with hevel and imagine a room full of smoke or a foggy, you know, when we drive down Pepperdine's campus and it's really, really foggy, kind of like that. Because this is the thing about smoke or vapor. It's very beautiful, but it's very fleeting. As soon as you like have an image of it in your mind of what it looks like, it has changed already, right? Even photos, you can't really capture like wisps of smoke and vapor in photos. It is there and it is real. And what happens as soon as you try to grab it? It's gone. There's nothing there. And so as soon as you try and solidify it and hold on to it and pause it, it's gone. And of course, as we know, it's temporary. And then one other thing, and I hope you remember this every time you drive through the fog or walk through the fog at Pepperdine, when we're in the middle of hevel, we're in the middle of smoke and vapor, it's really hard to see the truth. It's really hard to get the full picture. We're always only seeing a very limited perspective when we're in the middle of hevel, everything is hevel. So Ecclesiastes actually has two speakers. There is the author of Ecclesiastes who writes the very, very first couple verses and the very, very final few verses of Ecclesiastes. And then the author is giving the teacher, this critic that we've imagined him as. We borrowed that image from the Bible Project video. This critic has most of the book to kind of present his case of why everything is hevel. And he has three major cases for why everything is hevel. The first is death. Everyone dies. The second is the marching of time. Even for the time that we are here, in a couple hundred years, no one's going to know who we are. So hevel, everything is hevel. And the third is simply the chance of life. Yeah, sure. Maybe being wise most of the time gets you good things because you're making good decisions, but you could also get hit by a car tomorrow. And there's chance in life too. And the way the cards fall aren't always within our control. The Ecclesiastes writer is cynical for sure. He's a critic for a reason, and he is presenting an argument for why everything is hevel, but he's not hopeless either. So we're going to read Ecclesiastes 3 and unpack that a little bit. Well, someone read for us verses 1 through 8. Thanks, Lynn.
Here's the time. Sorry, is it 3:8 or it's
1 to 8. 1 to 8. 3 verses 1 to 8.
okay, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
Thank you. Really beautiful poetry, right? This is a good example of poetry that shows up in wisdom. It's also really good wisdom that it doesn't, the critic isn't telling us when the times are. That's contextual. But there is a time for all things, and there is a season for everything under the sun. And that is really beautiful. And so there are times to mourn, and there are times to be joyful. And there are times to plant and reap a harvest, and there are times to not do that. What does he say? A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted to harvest. Time for war and a time for peace. So from the micro level to the macro level, there is a season for everything. And one of the beauties of this section of the passage is how it represents the critic's inner turmoil. So the critic is like, yes, everything is hevel, and God's wisdom can be trusted. And yes, everything is hevel, and our life to some extent has meaning, and we can trust that. So one of the things that the critic is trying to do is that because everything is hevel, We should try and enjoy when we can experience good things during this life. However, that is not to say that like the critic also dismisses revelry and debauchery as well. That too is hevel. So one of the things that the critic does, and we'll read this in the next section, is the critic takes all of the things that we try to solidify our lives by, building our name through our career, you know, earning social status by rising through the ranks or earning money or whatever. Pleasure, like just living a life of, you know, living for the weekend, and they didn't think of it that way, but you know what I mean? Living for the weekend and just like enjoying things and soaking up everything for ourselves, like selfish type of living like that. And he dismantles that too, and says all of that is hevel. It's hevel. Everything is hevel. So let's read the next section and see what he has to say about that. Will someone read verses 9 through 15? Thanks. Go ahead, Jolene. Yeah, go ahead, Jolene.
What gain have the workers from their toil? I've seen the business that God has given everyone to be busy with. He has made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, he has put a sense of past and future into their minds. Yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it is God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their toil. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it nor anything taken from it. God has done this so that all should stand in awe before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by.
Mm-hmm. What gain have the workers from their toil? Empires rise, empires fall. That's a Hamilton. Oceans rise, empires fall. But you know, we build. What's the greatest thing someone can do with their life in terms of a career? Rule a country, create a country, build an empire. Even that would fall. Everything is hevel. And so what can the workers take from their toil? It is good that they can eat and drink and earn good things from their labor. But building our life and pretending like any of that is permanent, it's hevel, all of it is hevel. And yet there is this trust in God that God sees what we cannot in the midst of the hevel, and that God cares for that too, right? So even in the midst of the hevel, there's the critic saying, and yet this matters. All right, let's read this last section before we turn to Job. Will someone read verses 16 through 22? I can read it. Oh, John, did you want to read it? Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, witness was there, and in the place of righteousness, witness was there as well. I said to myself, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for he is a good time for every matter. I said to myself, with regard to humans, that God is testified to show that they are but animals. The fate of humans, the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the. They all have the same wrath, and humans have no advantage over their deed. For all who is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows whether the human spirit goes upward and the spirit of animals go downward too? So I saw that there is nothing better than that all should enjoy their work, for that is their lot. Who can bring them to see what will be after?
So that again, the critic is saying, we think we're so special, both as individuals and as a species. And everyone dies. The death is the great equalizer. According to the critic in Ecclesiastes, the great equalizer. Later in the book, it talks about how everyone, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, whether you're wise or foolish, death gets us all in the end. And even the animals. Like, who are we to really say? One of the things I thought of as John was talking about natural law and like where we are, is like we were designed to be a part of our ecosystems. It is foolishness to act as if we are not a part of the ecosystems that we depend on for life, right? And so to abuse those ecosystems is absolute foolishness. It's killing ourselves. We know that. So anyway, that's one of the things I was thinking of here. So again, death appears as one of these great equalizers, and it humbles us, where even the things that we think that we can grab onto to maintain our status, to make us permanent, that too is Hevel. Everything is Hevel. Before we turn to Job, what is anything from this chapter or from Ecclesiastes that stands out to you?
Oh, this guy just in a big sorrow to me. He just crying. That's all. Mankind, we never supposed to be part of the ecosystem. It was the mistake on creation pour into the ecosystem. We never supposed to die. And Christ going to Gethsemane, die in 3 days, resurrecting, show that mankind don't belongs over there. So since I became a human being, one of my greatest study, I've been studying as a person, I hate death. See, that's why I don't like people to be sick around. I've been in Southern California for 4 years. I never got sick. And that's why I don't like people to get sick. I just don't like people to have a problem. When it bothers me about people. We don't supposed to have these things. But when we fail, we become like the animal. You see it? So, see, I accept some of his things here, but some of his things, he's crying like a little boy. He's crying, Like, that's why I don't listen to music, because people make all the best music. When we're singing, we want a song, we want to cry back to God, saying that, oh, it's not supposed to be like the man just crying on the earth. Now we're complaining, we're living in chaos, we're just so confused because we have deserted from where we was on creation. So that's just simple as that. That's how it is.
I wish I could get to a spot where I could say it's as simple as that. I resonate a little bit more with the Ecclesiastes author, to be honest. That's fine. Different stages of life, right? Maybe that's all it is. But right now I'm kind of like, yeah, Hevel. Everything is Hevel. But I also resonate with the Ecclesiastes author that even when I perceive everything as Hevel, that God sees through the Hevel and knows the Hevel and cares for the Hevel and cares for everyone in the Hevel. And so I don't necessarily feel threatened by the Hevel either. And I don't think the Ecclesiastes author does either. I think what the critic in Ecclesiastes is trying to do is say, like, yeah, the wisdom of Proverbs is great, and there are times when that applies. And there's also a lot of time when chance rules the day. And ultimately, we all end up in the ground. And ultimately, none of us really know the answer to anything. And I think that's really humbling. I think that's a really important message. I think it was put in scripture for a reason. And I just really appreciate it. And to Emmanuel's point, Job kind of responds to that as well, too. So let's turn our attention to Job. This idea of Ecclesiastes being a crybaby. And so in Job, I'll give you some context before we turn our attention to Job 40, but if you have your own Bible and you want to turn there, we'll be in chapter 40 near the end. End-ish. So Job takes place in the land of Uz a long time ago, which is kind of in ancient literature, like saying in a galaxy far, far away. There's not really much that, like, in terms of the narrative story, like placing it in Uz and everything, we're meant to kind of read this as like an epic drama. We don't necessarily need to like understand Job to be a real person or anything like that. If you want to, that's fine. But the way that the narrative is structured is like in a galaxy far, far away, long ago. What is it in Star Wars? Yeah, long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's kind of like that. That's kind of how the book of Job starts. What's really interesting, this is another layer that's really interesting to it. The author of Job wants us to, like, if Job was a real person, the author wants us to disconnect Job from his historical context, from his cultural context, because Job is not an Israelite. and none of his friends are Israelites. At the very end, a new friend appears and has a Jewish name. But other than that, Job and none of his friends are Israelites. They're not a part of God's people. So they are wrestling with all of these questions disconnected from like the laws and narrative of ancient Israel. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So Job has everything. And then there's this really interesting courtroom scene essentially, where God has essentially like called together the council of angels. And it's like the divine court. And the adversary, the Ha-Satan, which means the Satan, the adversary, the challenger is maybe another way to think of it, steps up from the midst of the divine council as God is bragging about Job and says, Job only loves you because you give him everything you want. That's not real love. And Job says, and God says, all right, take it all away from Job, do what you will, and we'll see what happens. And so the Ha-Satan, the Satan that does just that, the adversary, takes away everything Job has. And so he loses his family, he loses his land, he loses his home, and he has nothing left. And so he is in mourning, obviously, and you can only imagine the emotional state that he's in, right? You lose everything all at once, including your spouse and all of your children. And we see that emotional state come through. Job is like on an emotional roller coaster through this thing. And so he's in mourning and his friends approach him. And at first his friends are really wise. They keep their mouths shut and they just sit with their friend in mourning. But then enough time passes and they've thought about it long enough and they start to say things to Job that really aren't super helpful. And namely, they start telling Job all of the sins that he must have committed for God to have punished him in this way, because the world, the universe is orderly. So if you have done something, if you've gotten something bad, it is because you have done something bad. And Job every time says, no, I did not do that. I have not sinned. I am righteous. This was unjust. So they go back and forth for like 30 chapters. It's like a really long dialogue where they're going back and forth. You can imagine it like a play. Like that would be it'd be really fun to like watch a play of Job and like see how that would play out. And then Job finally snaps and he says, God needs to come down here and defend himself because this is nonsense. And God does. And Job is immediately humbled because it's really terrifying. And essentially the way God responds to Job is, were you there at the creation of the earth? You have no idea the complexities of everything around you. This language isn't used in Job, but we can imagine it as like, you're in the middle of the hevel and I see through all the hevel. And you have such a limited perspective and I see it all. It's like when if Pepperdine is in the middle of fog and you're walking down the hill and all you can see is the law school as you're walking by it, but God can see the ocean that is completely unseeable to us as we're walking through the fog. And so he essentially says that. But this is the interesting thing. God never answers Job's question. Job never gets insight into the divine council of angels or the adversary challenging God and challenging Job. He never gets insight into any of that. God doesn't share any of that with him. As far as Job knows, the answer is, I'm not going to tell you. And or there is no answer. And or the rhyme or reason is so incomprehensible to you, there's no point in telling you. God just doesn't answer. So I chose John and I chose chapter 40 as a kind of example of this. Partially because we see some of the dialogue between God and Job. So at this point, God asks, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? Anyone who argues with God must respond. Because of course, Job called God down to defend himself, and God is saying, who are you? And then Job says, I am small. I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and I will not answer, twice, but will proceed no further. Like Job has learned his lesson at this point. He's like, oh yeah, I don't know anything. But then God goes on to continue answering Job. And essentially say, like, you have no right to accuse me. You do not see the full picture. But I want to jump to, since we're running low on time, I want to jump to the very, very end, verses 15 through 24, through the end. So Job 40 verses 15 to 24. Is anyone willing to read that relatively quickly?
The 15,
Yeah.
for few reasons, look at the heaven, which are made just as I made you. It eats grass like the ox. Its strength is in its line, and its power is in the muscle of its belly. It makes its tail staff like a cedar, and its sleeve of a thing tied are pinned together. Its bones are tube of bronze. Its limbs like bars of iron. It is the first of the greatest out of God. Only its maker can approach it with soul. For the mountains yield food for it, where all the wild animals play. Under the logs plant it lies in the cover of the reed and in the marsh. The logs tree cover it for shield. The willow of the water surrounded it. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not fighting. It is confident, though Jordan rushes against its mouth. Come, one, take it with hook, or pierce it nose with a snare.
So at the very end, God uses two final examples to demonstrate God's wisdom that is incomprehensible to humans. And two of those examples are the behemoth and the Leviathan. There are some people who speculate that the Leviathan and the behemoth are representatives of creatures that we have, namely the hippo and the crocodile. More likely, they were mythical creatures that the author is using to again expand our imagination of who God is. The point of the behemoth and the Leviathan, aside from like what exactly they're referring to, is the behemoth and the Leviathan are extremely dangerous creatures. No human can stand against them. Like imagine a dragon. Imagine like our mythologies of like fighting a dragon and like a dragon being super dangerous, out to get you, would eat you without pausing, like, and we're like, this can't be a good creature. And God is bragging about this creature. God is saying this creature is so good. Doesn't mean the creature is safe, but this creature is good and I'm proud of it. And it too is a part of my good creation. And so what I love about the behemoth and the Leviathan is that they embody how God's wisdom is grander than we can have perspective for. That even these things that we're like, there's nothing good that can come from that. For me, it's not a behemoth or a Leviathan. It's a fly. I hate flies. Flies are so annoying. Or a mosquito. Like think of that, where you're just like, what? Why would you create something so disgusting and irritating? And God is like, that too? I'll brag about it. And so God's wisdom, so as we have gone through this narrative of the wisdom series, Proverbs saying like, look, God has created an orderly world. And we can trust that if I do this, this will happen in general. And Ecclesiastes challenges that and says, honestly, there's a lot of chance. Death is the great equalizer. Time marches on and we're all going to be forgotten. Enjoy the little things while you can. And because everything is Hevel. And Job brings this picture of kind of like tying it together with God's wisdom and saying, God is wise and the world is orderly, even when we don't understand it. And we can trust in God's wisdom and participate in it to the best of our ability. And so again, at the very beginning last week, I shared with you all, I think we need all three of these books in order to have a full picture of wisdom and a full picture of biblical wisdom. And each of them on their own gives us a really important picture that helps us follow in the ways of God as God is calling us to participate in God's work in the world and who God is calling us to be. So that's wisdom literature. John, is there anything you want to add that I didn't cover? All right.
There's one
Then-
more thing you
Yes.
have to add, Ecclesiastes 12:12. Further, my son, be admonished of the making of many books, there is no end, and much study is a weariness to the flesh. Let's see, I gotta get it right. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Yeah,
This is
totally.
the conclusion of all of this.
Definitely, even in the midst of Hevel, to fear God and keep the Lord's commands is wisdom. Yeah, thanks for ending that there. All right, everyone, see you down at church.
Thank you.